finish out our unit, we're going to talk about Roman numeral 5, World War I. We see the iconic "I Want You" for the U.S. Army poster to try to get people to sign up for the United States Army in World War I. America takes its final steps towards war. The Sussex Pledge fails. So from our last lecture, we talked about how Germany had begun torpedoing American ships because they wanted the Americans to stop selling their supplies to the British, and so the Americans got upset about this. The Lusitania was sunk, and so the Germans did not want to fight America, so they took the Sussex Pledge, saying that the Germans would stop torpedoing American ships if the United States stopped selling supplies to Britain. Of course, the United States is going to continue to sell the supplies to Britain because we want the money for our war materials. And so the Sussex Pledge fails because the United States keeps selling weapons and food to the British, and so Germany starts to torpedo ships again. So once again, the Germans are killing American citizens on the Atlantic Ocean, which makes us angry. So we see here a picture again of the German U-boats. Wilson then decides that it's time to start giving Americans a chance to defend themselves. And so merchant ships are ships that are American ships which sell, transport goods. They're not part of the Navy, but they do transport goods. And so he says the United States ships can arm themselves, which is just another step closer to war, because now there might be some combat between German U-boats and American merchant ships that are armed. Then the Zimmerman Note is revealed. If you remember, the British had discovered the Zimmerman Note before, but they held on to it because they were waiting for the United States to be angry and willing to declare war. And so when the Sussex Pledge fails and the Germans start torpedoing more and more American ships, Americans get more and more angry, and then the British say, oh, look what we found. We found the Zimmerman Note, which again says the Germans are encouraging the Mexicans to attack the United States in return for a bunch of territory they'll get back when the Mexicans win. The United States finds out about this note via the British, and we get even more angry with the Germans. Not only are they torpedoing our ships, but now they're encouraging a neighbor of ours to attack us. And so Americans are on the edge of war. Woodrow Wilson actually would like to declare war because not only are our ships being attacked by the Germans and the Zimmerman Note, but Woodrow Wilson is starting to think that war might be a good thing. He thinks that if he could turn World War I into a progressive crusade, he believes that maybe we can make World War I the quote-unquote war to end all wars. That if America joins this war, we could spread democracy around the world. We could help all of those people who are suffering around the world. We could end future wars. And so that's what I mean by progressivism. Up to this point, Wilson believed that progressivism should be in America at home. The government should make people's lives better in America. But now he sees World War I as a chance to make the people of the world's lives better. And so he starts to think that the war might be a good thing, but he can't go to the American public and say, this is a war to spread democracy and make the world a better place, because if he joins the war on the side of the Allies, well, England is a democratic country, so we like that. France is a democratic country, and we like that. But the Russians, they're a monarchy, and he can't tell the American public that we are going to join this war to spread democracy and make the world a better place if one of our allies is a monarchy. And so he holds off declaring war, asking Congress to declare war. But then in 1917, the Russian monarchy is going to fall, and they're going to be replaced for a brief period of time with a democracy. And so this clears the way for Wilson to ask Congress for a declaration of war. He says that, our ships are being torpedoed, so American lives have been put in harm's way or destroyed. The Zimmerman Note he points to, and he also says that America will enter this war to try to spread democracy, which is a good thing. And he can now honestly say that this is going to happen because all of our allies, the Russians, the English, the French, are democracies. And so on April 2nd, 1917, the president asked Congress for a war declaration, and they give it to him. And so on January 8th, 1918, Wilson puts out what is famously known as his 14 points. They're the 14 things that he would like the United States to do for the war. It's our goals for the war. And all of these 14, we're not going to go through all 14, but just the most important ones, but all of these 14 points have one thing in common. They are trying to end reasons for future wars. Again, Wilson believes that World War I should be a war to end all wars. It'll be a progressive idea where the United States government with its allies is going to put conditions in place that we have no more wars in the world. And so that's the goal of his 14 points, eliminate warfare in the future. To do that, he is going to try to systematically take away the things that helped lead to World War I. And so he says, as part of his 14 points, if the United States wins the war, we are going to outlaw secret treaties in the world. And if you remember, one of the reasons World War I got so big is because all of these European nations had secret treaties of alliance with each other. And so when one country gets dragged into the war, and all of that country's allies get dragged into the war. And so if we outlaw secret treaties, wars will either be non-existent or really small, because nobody is going to have these unknown treaties that will drag other countries in. Next, freedom of the seas. That's another one of his 14 points. America got dragged into World War I because the Germans were torpedoing our ships. And so he says, I don't want that to ever happen again. And so after we win this war, the oceans of the world will be completely free and nobody will be able to bomb or torpedo any other ships. Next, reduce armaments, reduce weapons. Wilson believes that if nations have lots of tanks, airplanes, bullets, etc., that they're tempted to use them. And so he says that as a result of World War I, we will try to significantly reduce the amount of weapons in the world. Again, his goal is to make the world a better place. Ethnic self-determination, one of his 14 points. So I show you a map here of the world at this time, and basically everything on this map that isn't kind of a gray color or gold is controlled by Europe. The United States is an exception too. So if we look at Great Britain, it's this pink color. Great Britain owns huge parts of the world. France is blue. They own huge parts of Africa and Southeast Asia, so forth and so on. And so in the world at this time, Europe has empire. They control the world. And Woodrow Wilson believes that that is one of the reasons that caused World War I, that these European powers were carving up the world and competing for raw materials and colonies and resources. And so he needs to get rid of that so that we won't have this competition for resources anymore, hence no more wars. And so he says ethnic self-determination. The conquered people around the world should be able to control their own government. So if you're in Algeria, that's a French colony, that should be controlled by the Algerians. If you're in Sudan, it should be controlled by the Sudanese. If you're in India, it should be controlled by people in India, not the British. So that's ethnic self-determination. It'll end future wars for empire. In addition to that, it'll spread democracy. If you are Egyptian and you're controlled by the British Empire, he says that you should democratically be able to elect your own leaders and not have empire. And so again, it's spreading democracy, it's ending ideas for war, it's making the world a better place. The 14th point is perhaps the most important point for Wilson. He believes that in order to avoid war, the most important thing we need to have is a place where nations can come together, and instead of using bullets and tanks to settle their disagreements, they can use words and treaties. And so he wants to create a League of Nations. A League of Nations is just what it sounds like. Nations will come together and have this peaceful place to avoid any more wars in the future. And so that's all of these things, as I said, that's Wilson's 14 points. It's trying to avoid future wars, to make World War I the war to end all wars. The ultimate progressive crusade. Now, not all Americans are going to believe Wilson's 14 points or want the war. The first one we're going to talk about is the socialists. Here we see a picture of Eugene V. Debs. And if you remember from our last unit, Eugene V. Debs and the socialists are going to be attacked because they are against the war. Eugene V. Debs would go around America and he would tell audiences, he says, do not support this war. He said, this war is going to make the rich richer and the poor dead. All of these factories in America, the elite, East Coast elite, they're going to get rich selling weapons and manufacturing goods to the armies of the world, and so they get rich. But who will actually fight this war? All the poor people, your sons. And so he says, do not support this war. It's a capitalistic war to make the rich richer. Now, during the war, we don't want anybody to oppose it, and so Woodrow Wilson and the United States government, they attack these socialists, and Eugene V. Debs once again goes to jail for his opposition to the war, and the Socialist Party crumbles. The same is true of the international workers of the world. If you remember, we called them the Wobblies or the Communists. Big Bill Haywood was the leader of that organization. He is also opposed to the war for the same reason as the socialists, and he is going to be harassed, jailed, and eventually exiled from the United States. And so the Communist Party is going to severely take a hit from this, and they're going to disintegrate into almost nothing in America during World War I because the government will just not allow opposition to this war. Farmers are also opposed to the war. Farmers don't like the war, not so much for ideological reasons, but more for economic reasons. Before the United States got involved in the war, farmers were making a lot of money selling their food products to England and France and Russia and whoever. And so there was a very high demand, which led to high prices. But when the United States get involved in the war, the United States government is not going to want to have high food prices for our own citizens, and so they will put price limits on how much farmers can charge for their goods. And so that makes farmers angry, because just at the time where there's a huge demand for their product, for wheat or corn, the United States government is going to come in and say, no, you can't charge that much. And so this makes farmers mad because they see that their profits are going to be limited, and their sons are going to go fight in this war, while the rich East Coast elite will be making lots of money from U.S. government war contracts. German immigrants are also going to oppose the war because they believe that America should not be fighting on the side of the English. We are attacking Germans and we shouldn't be doing that. These German immigrants, they're proud of their heritage. They still have relatives back in Germany, and they don't want their new adopted country attacking their ancestors, families, or their relatives. So Wilson tries to get people to support the war, number 3. So since there's so much opposition to the war, Wilson creates the Committee on Public Information, headed by a man from Denver named George Creel. And this guy's job is to use propaganda to get people to support the war. And so one of the ways he does that is he creates these men. They're called the 4-Minute Men. And it's a whole army of speech givers, orators, and they give them this government-prepared speech that lasts about 4 minutes. And it's their job to go out on street corners, churches, and barbershops, and to give this 4-minute speech to try to convince the average person to support the war in a face-to-face way. Next, we see a whole plethora of patriotic war songs come out at this time. This one is by George M. Cohan. It's called Over There, and it's all about sending our troops over there to Europe. And when we do, the Yanks are coming. When we do go to war, it's going to be amazing. We're going to win the war. The drums are rum-tumming everywhere. Say a prayer. We're going to see that, Germany, you better beware. And we're not going to come back until it's victorious. And so this gives Americans, increases their patriotism, and makes them want to support the war. And of course, most famously, we have propaganda posters from World War I. On the top right-hand corner, we've looked at that poster before. It's an example of British propaganda to try to get the United States into the war. But then we see the famous Uncle Sam poster. In the bottom right-hand corner, we see the Enlist poster. It says, "On which side of the window are you?" And they're trying to use guilt or patriotism or peer pressure to tell young men, look, other young men are going out and joining the war effort. What are you doing? Are you just going to stand by and let other people go fight for America? And then the top left-hand poster, we see a woman with her baby, and she's sinking to the bottom of the ocean. You see the bubbles coming up out of her mouth. And it's reminding people of all the boats and all the innocent people that the German government killed in their attacks on the Lusitania and other ships as well. All of these are they're propaganda trying to get Americans to support the war effort. And so maybe the government did too good of a job. We see that we get this thing called war hysteria. Since the United States government has been telling Americans to go hate the Germans, we want to go kill the Germans, and they did too good of a job, perhaps. And so we see this little kid saying a sign, "To hell with the Kaiser," who's the king of Germany. We see mobs start to target German Americans, either because they have a German accent or a German name, or they express some sympathy with Germany. We even see some people be beaten up or killed. We also see Americans in their rush to disassociate with Germany. They'll rename any German word into something else. For example, most famously, sauerkraut will be renamed Liberty Cabbage. Symphonies and orchestras will refuse to play any German composers like Wagner or Beethoven because it's too German. And so we're going to see in World War I a definite anti-German sentiment in America created by the propaganda against the government of Germany. Also, we see this trend we've talked about a lot this year, that when we're in war or some kind of a crisis, we start to take away civil liberties. And so in 1917, the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act are passed, which basically limits people's freedom of speech. It is illegal to criticize the war effort. So we see in this cartoon the little children are free speech, free opinion, honest opinion, and the sedition bill is coming to kill it. We talked about this during the Civil War when Lincoln suspending habeas corpus and attacking peace Democrats or Copperheads. We saw it during the Revolutionary War when they attacked Loyalists. We will see it again and again in the future. So that's an example of what AP would call synthesis, comparing what's going on in this time to another instance in American history that's very similar. Also, the United States government, because of these acts, could suspend the mail. They could look through your mail, and if you're sending out anti-war propaganda, they can confiscate your mail. So freedom of speech is certainly being limited at this time. Eugene V. Debs is a great example of somebody who speaks out against the war, and he is going to be jailed because of his criticism of the war. So once again, socialists and communists are targets of the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Now, is this legal? Well, in the case of Schenck versus the United States, the Supreme Court says yes, and in fact it is legal for the United States to suspend civil liberties during a time of crisis. So when we come back, we'll talk about organizing for the war in our second part of the notes. Did I just...